So good afternoon and welcome. On behalf of the NJEDA, I really like to thank you for joining us today. Second of two listening sessions for the Aspire program. For those of you who I have not met before, it's my pleasure to meet you. I am Elizabeth Lindbergh. I'm the director of the Brownfields and Sustainable Systems team at NJEDA. Next slide. This program is building on the New Jersey Economic Recovery Act law. As part of this, we have to pass rules in order to be able to put these programs into effect. And the Aspire program is one of several programs in the Economic Recovery Act. This act was signed by Governor Phil Murphy on January 7th, 2021. And again, what we're here today, we are building the Aspire program specifications on this statute. So today's session is a continuation of the process that gets us to rule completion. I'm going to take you through an overview and format on the ground rules for this, and then I'm going to turn it over to Brian Sabina, who is our Chief Economic Growth Officer, and then Nat Bonningheimer, who will walk you through the details of the program. And then after the presentation, we will open it up to input from you. And if you do have comments for us, we really would like you to use the portal that's listed here on this website, which is njeda.com/Economic Recovery Act. And then we do actually have another slide that gives you a little more, but there's program specific feedback that you can actually put in as well. Next slide. So again, Governor Murphy has issued Executive Order 63, and that really is like one way that is guiding our community engagement process here. And again, today's session is only one step of these consistent points of engagement in our rulemaking process as we develop our programs. We do have multiple opportunities for engagement. This is an example of that informal program feedback. So we really are deepening and strengthening our efforts to engage with stakeholders and the community really at large. We're providing, again, multiple opportunities for the groups and the stakeholders to provide that meaningful input on how to engage with NJEDA in crafting these rules and standing up the Aspire program. We welcome constructive input on how to ensure our new programs are created through the Economic Recovery Act and are structured and administered in a manner that really drives opportunities for all residents and all communities. The first part of the session is going to be probably about half an hour of presentations from NJEDA. And again, then we will be opening up for public input. We have plenty of time for public input. So if you have items that you want to raise, you certainly will be given the time to do so. Next slide. We are recording this session, and again, that you can provide your input. You can find recordings of these sessions at njeda.com/program specific feedback. You can provide feedback on this particular program through September 24th. Again, all Aspire programs are going to be recorded and posted to that website. So for those of you who are here live today, great. For those of you who are watching us later, you will be able to take a look at us on our website. And we encourage you to do that. We encourage you to let others know that may have an interest in this as well, to let them know that they can find these recordings. Next. I did want to give you ground rules on our public feedback policy. Again, we will be accepting verbal input after the speakers have finished their presentations. So to provide your input, you're going to use the raise hand function. And then we will call on each person with their hand raised in order. And then we will unmute your microphone and you can make your statement. And in order to ensure that we have time to hear everyone's voice, you will have 3 minutes to speak. And we're going to ask that you keep your comments to matters pertaining to the Economic Recovery Act and the Aspire rules for this program. Again, each member of the public is going to have one opportunity to provide comments. And if we have time at the end and someone wants to provide additional comments, we're happy to provide that opportunity. Just a reminder, again, please limit your comments to the Economic Recovery Act, the Aspire program, or the draft rules. Again, this is a listening session. So we're asking our speakers to really limit any responses to clarifications. We're not going to be responding directly to questions about a specific project. So don't, ask us about, I have this project and this is what I want to do there. What do you think of that project or things like that? It's really about the rules for this program. Next slide. So the staff will summarize the draft rules and provide context. To access those draft rules, again, we have the website listed here, njeda.com/program-specific-feedback. One thing to note in this presentation is, again, we talked about how this really relies back to the statute or the act. Text highlighted in green on these slides indicates areas where the NJEDA has used the rules to add clarity to that legislation. Non-highlighted text is written into law, and NJEDA does not have discretion to change that. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Economic Growth Officer, Brian Sabina, to take you through the next part of the presentation. You are in good hands here. Brian?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'll try to keep my remarks here relatively brief, a couple of different themes. The first is thank you. Thank you to the NJEDA team led by Nat and Paul Seppi and a number of the folks who are with us to get us to this point. This is an important, complicated program, and they've done a great job. Thank you to our sister agencies. Many have already weighed in as part of this process, but a few call-outs and shout-outs to the Attorney General's office, of course, which is our partner in crime, our partner in rulemaking on all these programs. HMFA have been instrumental in helping to make sure that we're coordinated in our approach, especially for essential affordable housing projects, and for Treasury for being a great partner as always. And just kind of wrapping up the topic of thank you. Thank you to the many of you who are here today. That there are 30 plus attendees today from the public who are here to provide comment, to kind of hear more about the program. We really appreciate your engagement. I know it's Governor Murphy's view, it's our board's view, Tim Self, our CEO's view, our whole team's view. Input that we get through this process and the transparency and public engagement that we're pushing for really leads to better public policy, and it leads to better outcomes in the real economy. And that's a true, really for any rule, but especially true for a program as robust and as nuanced and as important as the Aspire program. What Elizabeth said around public transparency and making sure that you have the information and have a variety of ways to engage it is very important to us. We, as Elizabeth mentioned, there's 3 ways. So we've been getting feedback at the ERA statute level, kind of at a high level program level. Now we're kind of in our second mode of feedback, which is getting feedback specifically on draft program rules for the EO 63 process. But this is only the halfway point in this marathon. We're going to kind of turn and start to head home. We're going to bring this to our board, seek their approval, and then after that, there's the normal APA public comment process that everyone has a chance to provide formal feedback. So, the more that we can address here in the informal stage, the better we think that the outcome is, because we're going to start to run these programs on draft rules. And then we'll kind of formalize those rules through the formal comment period. What this does is, your robust input allows us to move ahead confidently and with a due haste that's required. And it's not hard for us to remember that many businesses in many communities are very much still reeling from the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, all of the economic shutdowns we've had for that. Layer that on top of long-standing historical inequities, whether it's in the housing market or commercial operations in our communities. What we're working on today in the Aspire program is important and it's big, and it is one of the signature tools that we'll have in our toolkit in the ERA for not just this year and next year, but for the next 7 to 8 years. And this is not just the base for this program, but many of the feedback and many of the topics addressed today will serve as a base as we start to move forward in other important programs like the Brownfield Tax Credit Program, the Historic Tax Credit Program, or Community Acreage Program. Many of those programs that we'll see in the coming months will utilize our similar kind of place-based tax credit programs. And the feedback you get today will certainly inform those programs moving forward. One of the things I'm most excited about is that this program is not just a replacement of ERG, which ERG is available, by the way, if you are a consultant or a company or a member of a community who has a project that needs to get going now to support community development. Both the commercial ERG program and the residential ERG program have applications available today. Please do feel free to, and available cap space. So you're free to put in applications, and we're happy to answer those questions. But these new programs like Aspire, we think are further enhancements to good policy, and they include a suite of public engagement mechanisms to really make sure that we're doing economic development the right way. Not least amount that Nat will talk about a little bit is our commitment to having community benefits agreements. And we're quite proud that you look at the Aspire program, the Merge program, we believe, and somebody is welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, that we're the first state in the country to take a comprehensive approach to community benefits agreements for a large tax credit program. That's something we're proud of. It means that we're doing economic development in a way that's responsive to the local communities that we're looking to work in. So we're quite proud of that. The bill has a series of other, this program has a series of other protections across the board, check-ins along the way to make sure that when projects do well and when we want them to do well, citizens and communities also do well, and nobody's overly enriched. So we are quite proud of the work we've done, and chief among the folks who've been leading that work is Nat, who is our Director of Real Estate Tax Credit Program. So with that, I'll pause and hand it over to Nat Button.
All right. Thanks very much, Brian and Elizabeth, for those introductions. As Elizabeth mentioned, the Aspire program was established under the Economic Recovery Act of 2020 in January of this year, which was significantly amended in cleanup legislation passed this past July. And Aspire, as Brian mentioned, is the successor to the Economic Recovery and Growth Program, ERG. And like ERG, the Aspire program provides tax credits to incentivize strategic real estate projects in our state. Tax credit awards under Aspire are based on an evaluation of project level financial need, and the program is intended by supporting commercial and residential growth to strengthen communities and create local benefits and encourage growth in communities with the greatest levels of distress. Recognizing the critical importance of carefully husbanding public resources, as you heard Brian just mentioned just now, the Aspire program includes a variety of protections that ensure scarce public funds reach the highest need targets. And the program will continue accepting applications until March 1st of 2027. So that's a big picture overview of the program. Next slide, please. So a couple of key features here. The Aspire program shares an annual program cap of $1.1 billion with the Emerge program, and that continues for 6 years. In the 7th year, any unused program funds can be rolled over for use in that 7th year. A typical Aspire project will be eligible to receive tax credit awards up to 45% of project costs in nominal dollars. Commercial projects in a government restricted municipality can receive a tax credit award up to 50% of project costs, and new construction projects using low-income housing tax credits can receive credits up to 60% of project costs. Transformative projects, which are projects with a minimum of $100 million in project costs, can receive up to $350 million in tax credit awards. And another key feature of Aspire that you should pay attention to is its 10-year eligibility period, which is the period during which tax credits are awarded and prevailing wage rates must be paid, during which net benefits are calculated, and for projects over $10 million in project cost, negotiation and support for a community benefits agreement is required. Next slide. So this graphic just gives an overview of a generic Aspire program project timetable, and let me just walk through it. So the first step that really starts the gears moving is the application submitted by the developer, and the rules include a comprehensive list similar to the ERG program list, but updated for the Aspire program of materials that need to be submitted by the developer, who is also, I'll be referring to as the applicant. And while this is the first stage, and sort of the thing that starts everything moving, a lot should be going on beforehand. There should be conversations between the developer and the host municipality, and with EDA and with our agency partners, and to the extent possible with representatives of the community that will be part of eventually crafting a community benefits agreement. Following the application review, submission, we'll be reviewing it here, and we'll be reviewing it according to the rules with our and statute with our partners at DEP, taxation and labor, to make sure that the applicants are in good standing and that all of the project elements are compliant with our partner agencies' requirements. The next step is action and hopefully approval by the EDA board. And following that, there is a 12-month period to finalize the community benefits agreement. And that is 6 months and 2 3-month periods of possible extensions. And final to that is the certificate of occupancy, which needs to occur within 4 years of board approval. So those are things that key off of the approval date. Because of the 4-year timeline for the certificate of occupancy, that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have advanced work done on a community benefits agreement prior to coming to the board. For one thing, it's important to know what the cost implications of that will be for the program, and we'll be talking about that later. But in addition, you just don't want to have any hiccups in that 6 to 12 month time period that could slow down the progress towards all the project approvals and ultimately the certificate of occupancy. So following the progress that hopefully is made quickly on getting financing, on finalizing construction drawings and costs, we go to project certification by EDA, where we're doing a comprehensive evaluation of the project and ensuring that the project still has the same economic parameters that were approved by the EDA board. And that is the point at which the 10-year eligibility period begins. Following that are a series of annual and biannual events, beginning with annual certifications of good standing, of CBA, Community Benefit Agreement terms compliance, that lead to the annual tax credit release. And the tax credits are released on a pro rata basis, 1/10 of the award each year over the 10-year period. There is an affirmative action requirement that continues for 2 years after certification. There are biennial university program reviews at which the projects that have entered the program will be evaluated, and the overall program will be sort of assessed, and we'll be taking that feedback and modifying the program as needed on the basis of that information. At year 7, there will be a return on investment validation, where we take a look at the success of the program. Hopefully it's doing as well or better. If it's doing significantly better, there are going to be rules that, as Brian mentioned, we're very supportive of motivating returns for a developer, but we don't want to see over enrichment of the developer, and there are provisions for the recapture of excess returns, which, if we get to the 10-year period and do the final project true-up, are above 15% of the projected returns at the beginning of the project. 20%, 1/5 of the excess returns would be returned to the state treasury. So at any time over this process, developers could appeal EDA actions or decisions, or reassign rights related to the development project, and those can occur anywhere over the life of the project. So we haven't identified them or called them out here. Maybe that's an overall. And the one thing I would just say is that there's a graphic for a transformative project would be relatively similar, except for the fact that we're entertaining phased development. And we have 6 years for certificate of occupancy on each phase. Sorry, we can extend the timeline for the end of the project for the certificate of occupancy, and so you can have multiple eligibility periods for each one eligibility period for each phase of the project as it is phased in. And so you could have a longer than 10-year overall project period for a transformative project relative to an Aspire project, but generally it's the same kind of process. Next slide. So I'll be going through these 4 major categories: award size, eligibility, fiscal and resident protections, and transformative projects. And why don't we jump to slide 11 now? Sorry, 13. So as I mentioned earlier, a typical or baseline Aspire eligible project can receive tax credits up to 45% of project costs, up to a ceiling of $42 million. There are some bonuses that build up from this baseline. If you're a commercial project in a government restricted municipality, you can receive tax credits up to 50% of project costs. If you're a newly constructed residential project that's also using 4% low-income housing tax credits, you can receive tax credits up to 60% of project costs. And if you're a project using low-income housing tax credits, or if you're a project in one of the geographies called out in this slide, you can receive tax credits up to $60 million. If you're one of the other types of projects, that could be 45% of eligible project costs, or 50%, or 60% of eligible project costs, depending on what type of project it is. Next slide. There we go, great. So there are quite a few defined geographies in the rules, and they're well spelled out in the rules. And they're significant because they play a role in what types of projects are allowed, what shares of eligible project costs can be used to set upper bounds on tax credit awards, and what tax credit award ceilings apply. The map shown on this slide here highlights some of the larger defined geographies where Aspire projects are eligible. For example, port districts include much of the eligible geography shown in North Jersey and in the New Jersey suburbs of Philadelphia. And the aviation district is clearly visible around Atlantic City. But some geographies are more granular, and you'll need to consult the rules for the qualifying geography. In addition, places that are designated Planning Area 1 are eligible, as well as places within half a mile of rail or high-frequency bus transit, and that are either Planning Area 2 or a designated center, according to the state plan. You should refer to the mapping URL that is shown here in the slide as a resource to help determine the defined categories your project address may be located in. And one quick note is that for the transformative program, which we'll be focusing on towards the end of the presentation, film projects can be located anywhere in the state. Next slide. So as far as project size goes, to qualify for Aspire program support, residential projects must have project costs of at least $5 million if they're located in a qualified incentive tract or a government restricted municipality, $17.5 million if they're located in a municipality with population greater than 200,000 people, or $10 million if located anywhere else. And for commercial projects, 100,000 square feet is the minimum size for Aspire program eligibility. Go to scoring. Next slide. So the Economic Recovery Act required EDA to score Aspire projects, but didn't specify a scoring rubric or how to apply that rubric. And the shading of the slide in green highlights that the project scoring approach described here is not statutorily prescribed, but is a product of EDA rulemaking. So until such time as EDA determines that resources available for Aspire projects are oversubscribed, EDA proposes to use a scoring approach that assesses project consistency with overall program objectives of supporting equitable, sustainable, smart, and transit-oriented growth. And to that end, EDA will evaluate the extent to which proposed projects would advance these policy objectives. The projects that advance these objectives will continue on to next phases of program evaluation and support. The specific questions proposed for project scoring will be provided to the EDA board at the same time the rules are brought to the board for action. So just want to emphasize that we've identified the areas here in the slide that we'll be developing project scoring for. We haven't developed the specific measurable, observable questions that will determine whether they do advance program objectives. So let's go to the next. Oh, and I guess, sorry, just if we can pop back, sorry. I mean, I did reference those overall program objectives, but we do want to be calling out aspects of climate resilience and environmental justice, consistency with local land use rules as well, just to make that clear, the relationship between the questions and those overall program objectives that I just mentioned. Next slide. So to qualify for Aspire program funding, a project must demonstrate that it has a funding or financing gap. And as it says here on the slide quite clearly, but I'm going to read it anyway because it's pretty important. The gap refers to the part of the total project cost, including reasonable and appropriate return on investment, that remains to be financed after all other sources of capital have been accounted for. And the key benchmark we'll be using here will be the reasonable and appropriate return on investment. So for each project, we'll be working with a third-party advisor to assess the location, industry class, the extent of local economic disadvantage, and other relevant factors to set a project-specific benchmark rate of return. And that rate will be used as a benchmark throughout the project's life with EDA for evaluating project success and related program elements. Next slide. So if an Aspire project has costs greater than $50 million, and again, this is eligible project costs greater than $50 million, the project can be developed in phases as long as each phase has costs greater than $50 million. And any project, including newly constructed residential units, must provide a minimum of 20% affordable housing. Next slide. So you all may be aware that prevailing wages must be paid and are required for all project costs during project construction. It's important to emphasize, though, that for both the Aspire and Transformative programs, prevailing wages will also be required for all building services and maintenance throughout the eligibility period. And for any project costs that may have been incurred prior to application that applicants also seek to include as eligible project costs, prevailing wages must have been paid for those project elements to be eligible either at the time or subsequently, and in time for those costs to be included in materials for EDA review. And finally, it's important to note that failure to comply with any of those provisions will be grounds for withholding of tax credits and other possible penalties over the course of the project. And I just said the rules have extensive language on exactly how that occurs and at what time frame and all the elements associated with that. Next page. So two final points about project eligibility for the Aspire program. The first is that projects must receive a letter of support by the time of application from the governing body of the municipality, which is effectively the municipal council or its equivalent, where the project will be located. And second, projects must meet, as I mentioned earlier in the project timeline graphic, affirmative action requirements for all work included as project costs, and for 2 years after a tax credit certificate is issued, as well as environmental and sustainability standards, and applicants will have to acknowledge the need to meet these standards and provide a description of how they will be met as part of their application. Next slide. So moving on now to a new category from eligibility into fiscal and resident protections and the community benefits agreement element that Brian mentioned and that we've really paid a lot of attention to. As I said before, any project with project costs above $10 million must negotiate, finalize, and support a community benefits agreement before obtaining project certification and final clearance to advance. A signed agreement with the chief executive of the host municipality, which is effectively the mayor, but we use that term to cover all the possible wordings around the state, Signed agreement with the chief executive is required at project certification, but at the time of project approval by the EDA board, all that's required is a letter from the chief executive of the municipality saying that they will negotiate a CBA in good faith with the applicant. The applicant will have 6 months and 2 3-month extension periods to negotiate the final approval after project approval. And again, just repeating what I said before, note that a certificate of occupancy is required within 4 years of board approval. So the longer it takes to negotiate a CBA after board approval, the more pressure there may be on project timelines. And again, for this reason, the more progress that can be made with host communities prior to board action, the better. Also, the ERA requires the appointment of a community benefits advisory committee with at least 3 members, none of whom, and the appointment is by the mayor of the municipality, none of whom may have an interest in the project or community benefits agreement programming. And the committee must meet publicly and transparently at least once prior to the finalization of the community benefits agreement, and must certify developer compliance with the terms of the CBA each year of the project's eligibility period. And these protections are especially important because of the resources that EDA is proposing in the rules to make available for community benefit agreements. As proposed, tax credits awards equivalent to up to 5% of eligible project costs are available. So CBA related costs are to be accounted for in project soft costs, which has a ceiling of 20% of total eligible project costs, or as an ongoing costs as part of the developer cash flow. So a project's proposed CBA spending will be measured as the sum of project costs incurred during project construction, plus the capitalized value of operating costs that are programmed for the duration of the 10-year eligibility period. So you could imagine, for example, a capital investment at the outset in a parklet, and then ongoing payments over the 10 years of the eligibility period to program and maintain the parklet or any kind of equivalent. And the sum of those two would not be allowed to be greater than 5% from the point of view of our use of our tax credits to support that CBA. Next slide. So another important protection, this fiscal protection is like Emerge, the subject of is the net benefit test to which Aspire and Emerge programs are subject to. So a few important details about them. The first is that the net benefit test is more stringent for communities that are not government restricted municipalities. So for projects in GRMs, the threshold level of benefits is 150% of the requested tax credit award. For all other locations, the threshold level of benefits is 185% of the requested tax credit award. And that has its basis in the statute. That difference in the stringency of the net benefit test. A couple of quick points about that. There's no net benefit test required for residential projects, and food service and healthcare centers are also exempt from the benefit test as long as they're over 10,000 square feet in size. Next slide. So a couple of technical aspects about how we do the net benefit test. We'll be using the in-plan model. For construction benefits, we'll be measuring direct, indirect, and induced tax revenues at the state level. For ongoing benefits, we'll be measuring direct and indirect tax revenues at the state level. And an important detail on this is that we will be using regional average salaries for each real estate use and employee based on employee per square foot data. So we're not going to be trying, in the Emerge program, we have a much better understanding of what kinds of jobs, how many and what type will be part of an incentive agreement. With the Aspire program, we're working with a developer. The developer will eventually be the landlord and will not necessarily have access to the same certainty or level of information about the kinds of jobs in each project. So the first thing is we don't want to put the developer in the role of having to incur that administrator burden. We're also interested in having a methodology that is replicable from project to project and certain in application. And the third is that we also just don't want to create a situation where applicants are incentivized to provide estimates of tenant employee characteristics that may be optimistic. So this is the approach that we have proposed in the rules for how to do that. And the other detail related to sort of regional specificity and making the net benefit tests appropriate by region is that we'll be using distinct regional multipliers, one for South New Jersey and one for North Jersey, that are based on economic specifics of those two distinct geographies. We are going to permit local tax benefits to be included in the net benefit test, but only when they benefit the state and are sufficiently evidenced by the applicant. And this is FYI, we're proposing to use a 2% inflation rate and an 8% discount rate across all our impact calculations. Next slide. So as far as tax credit transfers go, any that are awarded through the Aspire program, so for the program to achieve its policy purposes, the statute requires the credits can be sold for no less than 85% of their nominal value. And there are two exceptions to this. The first is for residential projects that are financed by low-income housing tax credits. Recipients of these tax credit awards can sell them for no less than 65% of their nominal value. And the second exception that is in our rules is not part of statute. Residential projects that are not using low-income housing tax credits, but still have a plan approved by HMFA and EDA, can sell their credits for no less than 75% of nominal value. And another element of the tax credit transfer program rules that listeners should be aware of is that the credits issued under Aspire may only be transferred once. So this will require heightened awareness by program participants from the very beginning and acknowledgement of this limitation by applicants and awardees at one or more points throughout the process. Next slide. This slide and the following slide, I'm not going to read from. I just want to, because the details are contained in the slides, but we just wanted to be clear about the level of transparency that is part of the program and the kind of information about applicants that will be shared with the public related here for tax credit transfers. And you can see the elements that are going to be made available here. And on the next slide, for transfers of interest in the incentive award agreement. And so we will be publishing this information as well as, for each project, award details and in aggregate as part of the university program review. But I just do want to emphasize that being part of the program comes with major benefits, but it also comes with a certain amount of openness as well. Move on to 29. So we talked a little bit before about rate of return and how that fits into the fiscal protections category. As I said, we want applicants to be motivated by the returns that are available, but we want them to be appropriate, and we want to avoid situations where there is excessive enrichment. And we'll be working with a third-party expert to determine a reasonable and appropriate rate of return for each project that's based on the specific characteristics that I mentioned before and that are listed here. And for everyone's information, historically, across all municipalities and industry classes in New Jersey, those return rates have ranged between 11% and 19%. That is, again, it's a historical perspective. We're not bound by that in future, but that is what we have seen in the past as the range of target rates of return. Project economics will be approved and set at board approval, checked at project certification for consistency with board approval. Actual returns will be reviewed at year 7. There'll be a process for escrowing surplus revenues if the project is meeting thresholds and for overperformance. And the final project true-up will take place at year 10. And as I mentioned earlier, if actual returns exceed board-approved rates of return by more than 15%, the state treasury will receive a 20% of that overage. Last two slides of my portion are going to be about the transformative element of the program. So whereas the base tax credit award for the Aspire program is 45% of eligible project costs, for the transformative program, the percent is capped at 40%. And whereas for the Aspire program, there are various project tax credit award levels up to $60 million, for the transformative program, the maximum award tops out at $350 million. Transformative projects must also be located in an incentive area, a distressed municipality, a government restricted municipality, or enhanced area. Again, all terms defined in the rules. And they must also construct or involve the substantial rehabilitation of at least 500,000 square feet of space. And for film studio projects, the minimum space requirement is 250,000 square feet, with transformative studio projects, as I mentioned earlier, being eligible to be located anywhere in the state. Last slide. So finally, transformative residential projects must develop a minimum of 1,000 units or develop at least 100,000 square feet of commercial space, and if in a government restricted municipality, 250 residential units. If in an enhanced area, at least 350 units. If in any other eligible incentive area, at least 600 units. And transformative commercial projects must, for any residential project components that are part of those projects, provide at least 20% of the units for low and moderate income households, and ensure that no more than 50% of project space is comprised of retail uses. And with that, my overview of the program is concluded, and we move to the next phase of hearing the issues that you all have identified or the questions that you would like answered by us.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Nat. And thank you, Brian, as well. This is really an exciting program. This is going to provide not only a huge boost to New Jersey's economy, but also, really contributing to creating those thriving and inclusive communities that we're striving for. So great work on this, great information. You obviously have put a lot of thought and effort into drafting these rules. And we are now intentionally creating that space for public engagement. And we now want to turn it over to the public. It is your turn to give us your input. And we really are hoping for an engaging session here. So just want to reinforce that we are recording this meeting, and we want you to be aware that the recording, of course, has begun. And if you speak on the record, it is your consent that you support being recorded. Again, just a reminder of our public feedback. We, first of all, are asking that you please use the raise hand function, and I will call on each person with their hand raised in the order that it is raised, and then we will unmute your microphone and you can make your statement. Again, in order to ensure that we have time for everyone's voice to be heard, you will have 3 minutes, and you can see the timer that is on your screen. So we're asking you please keep your comments to matters pertaining to the Economic Recovery Act and the Aspire program and the draft rules before you. Again, you'll have, each member of the public will have one opportunity to provide those comments, but if we have additional time at the end, if someone wanted to provide additional comments, we would be more than happy to provide that opportunity for those additional remarks. Just a reminder, this is your chance to speak about the Aspire program. This is also a listening session, and we're asking our speakers to limit their responses just to those clarifications. We're asking that all speakers and members of the public provide their remarks in a civil manner. And so with that, let's see the list of people with their hands up. I believe the first person is Marie Verstein. We will unmute you, and you can, please, yeah, you're unmuted now. Please go ahead and make your comment.
Elizabeth, thank you. I attended Friday as well, and I very much appreciate staff's time to allow public comment. So thank you. I just wanted to follow up on my comment on Friday. I had asked a question with respect to the 20% equity requirement and the challenges with multiple programs where New Jersey Housing might be seeking to maximize the debt and also not not wanting to reduce the LIHTC credits as a result of the Aspire credits. So my understanding on Friday was that EDA would defer to the New Jersey Housing Underwriting Lead Counsel and the developer on this that I've been working with just were concerned that the statutory requirement was 20% and that there might not necessarily be leeway to defer to New Jersey Housing under regulatory matters. So I just wanted to, again, just ask that question and see if there was any leeway and if it was permissible. And then just in that vein, in terms of what qualifies as equity, if RAB proceeds might also be allowed to be considered equity since it's a local subsidy and put back as a source into the project. Again, thank you for entertaining my questions. Thank you.
Hey, Marty, I think I'll take this one. I was on the bench on Friday. Yeah, I mean, you're right in the follow-up. It's Paul Seppi, by the way.
Thank you.
The law does have specific requirements as it relates to the equity contribution of the project. So depending on its location, it will either be 20% or 10% with little flexibility in that value of amount. The actual equity itself could be, there are various forms of equity. We have not entertained the idea of RAD proceeds. So that's something we'll have to take a look at a little bit closer. But certainly deferred fees, low-income housing deferred developers fees, low-income housing tax credit, equity, certainly cash always works, as well as potentially the value of land. So I recall from Friday's discussion, there was also a question that related to land and its value, and why do we ask for appraisals if we're not allowing tax credits onto it or for the land? That's primarily the reason behind that aspect of things. So if a developer wants to include that land to work towards or count towards that equity contribution, we'll look to understand what the value of that property is. So hopefully that might kill two birds with one stone in that one response. But to your direct point, the requirement is either 10 or 20% equity. That form of equity varies, but that is what would be required.
Okay, real quick, because I know my time is running out. If the value of the land is increased above and beyond what's presented in our budget, could that increase in value be counted toward the equity?
It would depend on what you paid for the property and when.
I see. Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Marty. And thank you, Paul Seppi, for stepping in there. I see our next question is from James Williams. James, we're going to unmute you and then you can ask your question. James, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm sorry. I was probably just a little fast. So good afternoon. Thank you guys for putting this event on. James Williams. I'm with Fair Share Housing Center. One of the questions that we had is ultimately going to be about the accountability for the 20% and just seeing what kind of parameters is EDA looking to put in place to ensure that, for instance, that you don't have some developers that are like purposely using that 20% set aside to build, for instance, like single bedroom units where that really isn't helping families or others in that particular way. So what are we putting some accountability parameters in place to really ensure that we don't have any bad actors that try to manipulate the system to build specific types of units as opposed to making affordable housing for all types?
So this is Nat, and one of the things I just wanted to add is that I think that we are intending to, have the program achieve its effect, its purpose of providing affordable housing and workforce housing that is necessary to to the economy as well as to residents of the state. And we'll be working closely with HMFA to make sure, and we already have been, to make sure that the project is run in a way that is has all these kinds of safeguards. I don't feel like I can give you a specific answer to your question right now, but it's something that I think we're going to note and make sure that we explicitly address in our answers. So I can say that the objectives that you have are objectives that we have as well, and we just need to make it clear what the elements are of the program that are going to lead to those outcomes. And we'll do that in our responses.
Thank you. We'll have some written comments that we'll submit as well. So thank you, and we're looking forward to taking a review of those responses.
That would be very helpful. Thank you very much for that.
No problem.
Thank you, Nat, and thank you, James. And James, you bring up a good point, and we have our slide here actually talking about one way to submit comments to us in writing is through our website, and we have the link right here, njeda.com/program-specific-feedback, and that is good and through September 24th for the Aspire program. So thank you for that opportunity to remind folks about that. The other thing I just wanted to mention is these are great questions, and this is exactly the kind of engagement we are very grateful for your continued engagement. As Brian mentioned, your engagement really makes our rules that much stronger, and that's what we're here for. We are here to get your input. We aren't here just for you to listen to us speak. So if others have additional questions, I invite you to raise your hand as we, again, are here to seek your feedback. I guess, Nat, in the meantime, while we're waiting to see if any additional hands get raised, there was a question that I wanted to pose to you is about whether or not a project that would include a new or reopening of a rail transit station, how that might affect the affected through the Aspire program.
Yeah, so I saw that question, and can we perhaps unmute Andrew Kennedy and ask him to just elaborate on what he has in mind?
Andrew, are you still on the line? Are you still here? Are we able to have you unmute?
I don't know that he's still here.
Okay. And I'm
happy to answer it for posterity, and we can make sure that Andrew gets a copy of this recording.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
I think we would certainly take that into account. Obviously, the geographic eligibility has a factor, so that factors into geographic eligibility. If a project was, I think that's right around the time when Andrew asked that question, if I recall, through the presentation. So we would certainly be willing to take a look at that. Of course, the specific facts of the situation would govern. But if there is a question like that is context specific, feel free to reach out to Nat and our team and Paul, and we'll kind of work through that with you all.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, I would just say the starting point from any first review of a project is to take a look at its proposed economics and the gap between what project revenues cover and what the project costs are. And the project cost element is what I'm assuming is Andrew was asking about as far as the inclusion of some kind of transit infrastructure. We just have to take a look at that and see, how much of a part of the project it was, or whether it's an ancillary part of the project, or that's. But
I think for building on that, I think you'd imagine that EDA would, similar to the way that we would partner directly with HMFA on all things affordable housing, would partner with our other government agencies, whether it's the Trend Agency or Department of Transportation. It is not our intent to be subsidizing transport infrastructure through the Aspire program, but we'd certainly be able to figure out the right set of tools to bring to one of those projects.
For anybody that's listening, I think the important part to think about for any of these projects, unless it's one of the 3 exceptions to the net benefit test. You need to think about the benefits that's providing to the state, monetary benefits, not so much the, hey, it'd be great if there was a train station in my town, because I think it would be. But the reality is the project has got to generate enough benefit to cover the award itself. So reopening a train station that's part of a larger project, probably a good idea. Train station by itself may not qualify because of that requirement.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Nat, for all jumping in there. Right now, I do not see any additional hands raised at the moment. Again, if anybody wants to raise them as I give our concluding remarks, please feel free to do that.
Elizabeth, I did see there was another question that came in earlier about who will be running the in-plan model. Will it be NJEDA, or would it be a developer who would need to kind of purchase a license to in-plan and then submit that? Nat, any thoughts there?
That is going to be us in-house using our folks and our resources. I don't expect that we would be outsourcing that.
Agree.
Okay. So I guess we can go to the last slide. And I just want to remind everybody that this public feedback session, along with our others, is being recorded and will be posted to our website. And you can find that at njeda.com/Economic Recovery Act. Again, members of the public who weren't able to participate with us live will have the opportunity to review and comment. I'd really like to thank everyone who has spoken, everyone who has provided their comments today. This, again, is exactly what we need to make the program be the best it can be. I want to thank again all of our presenters, and most of all to those of you who are watching live or watching the recorded version. Please let your colleagues know about this, your friends, anyone else that would be interested in this topic, and encourage them to do the same, to watch this video and provide their input. Again, this only works because you are willing to engage with us on this level, and without that, we really wouldn't be able to push forward the rulemaking and launch of programs the way we're able to do that. So again, we're really grateful for that. I also want to thank all of our back office colleagues who helped bring this recording and webinar to you. And I invite you to follow us on social media. You can see we have Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. We have a podcast as well. So you can stay up to date with everything that we're doing. So with that, thank you all. And this concludes today's session. Please have a great afternoon.